So let's be honest, we all hoard loot. It's okay, we're all friends here, let's talk about it. We all find a good looking piece of gear or a weapon, even if it's not something you need or could even use right now, and we all think the same thing. This might be useful later. So, in the stash it goes for later, but later never comes. Hey folks, I'm Abrax and welcome back to another Division 2 video. In this one, I'm going to talk about inventory management, what you should keep, what you shouldn't keep, and hopefully help you stop hoarding all of that unnecessary loot. Let's jump into it. If you are new to the channel, hello, welcome, and if you enjoy this video or find it helpful, giving it a like goes a long way, and consider subscribing and ringing the bell so you don't miss any future videos. With that, let's talk about inventory management. In looter games, it's easy to keep some good loot you pick up just because the attributes are high, but just because it's a god roll doesn't mean it's a useful god roll. And I'll admit it, this is something I fall victim to myself. In fact, I'm currently in need of a big stash clear out right now. I have a habit of keeping loot because you never know what the next meta or buff will be in a future update or balancing patch. But this means I always have a full stash, overflowing character inventory, and a few mule characters at that. Well, like I said, in this video, I'm going to go over what you should be looking at keeping, what you should do with the things you shouldn't be keeping, and hopefully give you a few useful bits of information along the way. I will also add chapters and timestamps to the video, just in case you're looking for any specific info. But first, for new players, let's talk about inventory in Tom Clancy's Division 2, the different types and how it works. If you are a new player to looters, when I say inventory, I'm referring to a space you have to store loot in. Whether that's weapons, gear, or mods, and there are a few different types of inventory you have access to in the Division 2. First, we have your character's inventory. This is your main inventory for the character that you're currently logged into. You have access to this inventory anywhere, at any time, and from here you can keep anything you might want to switch to while you're playing the game, and equip items straight to your character. This is also where any gear or weapons you pick up while playing the game will be stored. When you first start playing the Division 2, your character's inventory will only have 30 spaces, but as you play the game, you will be able to increase that up to a maximum of 150 spaces. Next, we have your mod inventory. This works the same way as your character's normal inventory, but is its own space specifically for gear and skill mods. So this is where you're going to store any mods that you want to carry around on your character or that you pick up while looting. Just like your main inventory, you don't start off with much space here, but it will eventually max out at 100 spaces. Then there is your stash. This is an account-wide inventory that's shared across all 4 of your character slots. This means any of your characters can put an item into your stash, and a completely different character will be able to take the item out and use it, as long as they're the same level as the gear or weapon. Your stash is your largest inventory storage, with 300 spaces, but like I said, this is shared across up to 4 characters. And unlike your character's inventories, your stash includes gear and weapons, as well as your mods. Your stash also has a few other sections, like the Deliveries tab, which can hold up to 60 items extracted from the Dark Zone. But that is the only way to get items into your deliveries, so it can't really be used as conventional storage, but that doesn't mean you can't let extracted items sit in there until you actually need them to save a little stash space. Another less conventional way to store excess loot that you may have heard of is to create a mule character. If you've not come across this term before, a mule character is a character created in a spare character slot purely with the intention of carrying and storing extra loot. This is something you can easily do by putting whatever you want to keep from your main character's inventory into the stash, then switching over to the mule character, taking it out, and just letting them hold it until you need it. The problem with this though is it's very hard to keep track of what the mule character is carrying, having to switch between characters constantly just to check if they have a piece you're looking for. Personally, I use a mule character to carry excess exotics, and this is because in the Division 2 you only really need 1 of each exotic, and you can only hold a max of 20 exotic components, so you don't really need extra exotics. So if you already have an exotic, and you're maxed out on the components, you don't really need an extra. There wouldn't be any point deconstructing it, and the exotic components are too useful to sell the item. So you may as well keep them on a Mule character, just in case you need to reroll some exotics and need a few extra components. Now we've covered and talked about the different types of inventory you have in the Division 2, let's get on to why you're probably watching this video, what to keep and what not to. It's very easy to get into the habit of throwing anything that looks useful, or like it could be useful in the future, in the stash, even if it's not necessarily the optimal attributes or talent for the brand. We still keep it anyway, and let's be honest, we've all done it. We all have somewhere a piece of gear that's probably a DPS brand with max blue or yellow attributes, or probably both. And at some point, yeah, it might be useful, but for a very specific type of build. Maybe you're the kind of player that likes creating really out of the norm builds, and you want loot that breaks some of the normal conventions. But in most cases, keeping randomly rolled pieces of gear that you may never use is just going to clog up your inventory and your stash. So when you find a piece of gear or weapon or a mod that you 100% want to keep, you have no space. And there's nothing worse than jumping in game to farm a build and finding your character's inventory full. So you head over to the stash to empty some loot, which is also full. And not everybody wants to be spending a large amount of their precious game time doing inventory management. Not saying it's not relaxing from time to time, just not what we all want to be doing. So I'm going to go over some things I keep in mind when I'm considering what to keep and what to ditch while I'm out farming for gear, weapons and mods. But of course remember, this is how I like to process my loot. How you do your inventory management is completely up to you. Let's start with gear. So there's always a chance you're looking to put together something a little different, or something that needs a combination of mixed attributes. Like for a PvP build, you might want to look for a damage brand that has hazard protection to protect yourself from status effects, or a defensive brand with damage attributes like crit damage or chance. But to me, these are the kinds of gear pieces that I'll head out and farm once I've put together a rough idea for a build that I would need them for. Which, by the way, if you're interested in my full build process, from idea to a finished build, check out my video going over a full build process that I'll link in the description and in the top right here. The kind of gear I tend to keep or keep an eye out for have attributes that align and are optimal with the brand they're on. Let me give you an example. If you have a piece of gear with a damage brand set, like Providence, Grupo or Cheska, I'd be looking for pieces of gear with high damage or red attribute rolls. But on top of that, I want the attributes to line up with the gear brand's strengths. So crit hit chance and crit hit damage on Cheska and Grupo. Or for a brand more like Araldi, I'd want weapon handling and headshot damage, with it being a sniper brand. More often than not with a damage brand, I want crit chance and crit damage, mainly because when you reach the end game of the Division 2, you start to run into a lot more headless enemies in legendary missions and with the Black Tusk in general, so crit becomes overall more versatile and headshot damage. Similar idea goes for defensive or skill gear. With blue gear, I'm often looking for armor regen and usually hazard protection, but like with damage brands, it depends on the brand bonus. More often than not on skill gear, I want skill damage and skill haste, but there are plenty of skill brands that want to use other attributes. Really, it's about looking at the brand bonuses and getting attributes that play into those strengths. Look at Alps branded gear. Like I said, with most skill gear, I do go for skill damage and haste. But the bonuses we get from Alps revolve more around repair skill, so skill damage would just be a waste. We'd be better off keeping Alps gear rolled with repair skill and skill haste, which would give us a much stronger piece of gear for a potential healing build in the future. Making sure you keep gear that plays into the brand's strengths means that in the future you can take a look through your stash and hopefully find an optimal piece of gear for any build you're trying to put together. Like I said, there are always those times you want something a little bit different, but I always tend to farm those pieces, because there's too many attribute combinations to keep them all. You also want to make sure you're storing gear with pretty good attribute rolls, but now that we have the optimization station, it's not essential to store just god rolls. If you find a gear piece with near perfect rolls, stash it and optimize it later when you actually need it. Something else to mention is talents on the chest piece and the backpack. Personally, I ideally want a chest or a backpack to already have the attributes I was looking for, without the need to recalibrate either. That way the talent can be switched out depending on what I need it to be. This makes the gear piece useful for a larger range of builds and much more versatile and flexible. With weapons, the type or archetype of the weapons you want to keep is completely up to you and how you like to play, but I would recommend keeping a few of each type. Assault rifles, SMGs, rifles and so on. That way you have a good variety of weapons in your stash that you can dig through for any build you might want to put together. Ideally keep an eye out for weapons that are either very strong in the current meta or weapons you just enjoy playing. We all have those guns that we just enjoy to play, even though they're not necessarily the best in slot. With weapons, we don't have to worry about the first two attributes because they're always fixed. We're just looking for some good high rolls here. For the randomly rolled third attribute, I always tend to go for damage to targets out of cover. This is simply because it's one of the largest damage increases you can add to any build. It applies to both armor and health, with the only downside being it doesn't apply to enemies that are in cover, but I've never really found this to be an issue. Players rarely use cover in PvP, and NPCs don't really use it either, or they're easily pushed out. But the reason damage to targets out of cover is such a large damage increase is because it's multiplicative damage, which almost always nets a larger damage increase than additive damage. If that just went over your head and you have no idea what I'm talking about, check out my video where I go over the difference between multiplicative and additive damage and break it down as simply as possible. I will also link that in the description and in the top right here. And just like with gear, I ideally like to find a weapon that already comes with damage to targets out of cover, and all three attributes having pretty good rolls. Because remember, we can now optimize any missing percentages. I'd much rather find a weapon with a third attribute I already want and a random talent, because I know with most of the builds I make, I'm going to be using damage to targets out of cover as the third attribute. But for the talent, I like to change these around depending on the build. It gives the weapon much more flexibility and versatility. Mods. Mods are by far the easiest thing to manage in your inventory. I pretty much keep 3 of everything because you never know when you'll need them, or if you'll want them for one of your other characters. And while I'm out farming, I just keep an eye out for any mods with high or max rolls to replace any I already have with better rolls. That's it, super easy. Rinse and repeat until you have 3 of each gear and skill mod maxed out. Although that might be easier said than done. Hopefully these tips help you decide what to keep and what to get rid of. But what do you do with all of that gear and those weapons that you're ready to bin? First thing is always check your crafting materials. Now we have the optimization station, they're more valuable than ever and definitely worth stocking up on. After you've maxed out your crafting materials, just sell the rest to the nearest vendor. I hope this video has helped or inspired you to clear the stash out a little bit. If you did find this video helpful, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe and ring the little bell so you don't miss any future uploads. There's also plenty more of my videos in the description, including the videos I mentioned in this one, if you want to check them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.